I still recall the day I pulled into Magnolia Orchard Estates, a suburban development perched on low rolling hills in a leafy corner of the United States. The large stone sign by the entrance read, Magnolia Orchard Estates, a blossom of community spirit. I had hoped to find a peaceful environment to continue my work in pediatric nutrition, a field I'd spent many years mastering. For the past decade, I'd built a reputation as a nationally recognized expert, consulting with hospitals and clinics on how to ensure newborns and infants got optimal nourishment. Yet my colleagues and most neighbors here knew little of my background. I preferred to keep a low profile. The move was supposed to let me focus on finishing a new research project while enjoying tranquil suburban life. On that first day, the wide, tree-lined streets and neat lawns charmed me. I envisioned quiet evening walks, friendly chats over fences, and a robust sense of community. Little did I suspect that behind Magnolia Orchard Estate's manicured facade lurked a hidden tyranny, embodied by Brenda Farnell, a woman all but officially called Karen by everyone around her. She was in her 50s, with meticulously coiffed blonde hair, a perpetual scowl, and a posture suggesting she believed herself the ultimate authority on what was best for the neighborhood. No sooner had I started unloading boxes from the moving truck than Karen materialized, clipboard in hand. She wore a rose-colored polo embroidered with the Magnolia Orchard Estates HOA logo. Under her arm, she carried a binder stuffed with rules, regulations, and notes. She wasted no time. "Hello," she said crisply, with a tight-lipped smile. "I'm Brenda Farnell, though many simply call me Karen, and I serve as the treasurer of our homeowners association. Welcome to Magnolia Orchard Estates. I trust you've read our guidelines thoroughly." I forced a polite nod. "Nice to meet you." I glanced at the packet. "I'll be sure to follow any rules." Karen's keen gaze swept over the disarray of boxes and furniture on my driveway. "We take community standards very seriously. If you have concerns about the guidelines, I recommend you bring them up at our monthly HOA meeting. Our rules ensure property values remain high." Her tone dripped with condescension. I thanked her, but inside I felt a flicker of unease. Even so, I assumed Karen was merely an overzealous volunteer. I had no idea that her controlling nature extended to meddling in infant nutrition clinics, a matter so personal and vital that it would soon push the neighborhood, and me, into open conflict. Magnolia Orchard Estates had a significant population of young families, many with newborns or toddlers. Within the development stood 2 small infant nutrition clinics that were part of a local county health initiative. These were not large hospitals. Rather, they were cozy storefront offices in a shared commercial space at the edge of the neighborhood. Staffed by registered dietitians and lactation consultants, the clinics offered free or low-cost assistance to parents. Monthly weigh-ins, breastfeeding support, guidance on formula usage, and classes on introducing solid foods. When I learned about these clinics, I felt quietly thrilled. It was an unusual advantage for a suburban development to have direct access to specialized infant nutrition resources. If anything, it signaled that the community cared about the well-being of its youngest members. Some neighbors told me how the clinics were a godsend, particularly for families with limited means who sought professional advice on feeding issues. Even more affluent residents praised how convenient it was to drop in for quick checkups instead of driving across town to a hospital. During my first couple of weeks, I introduced myself to the clinic staff, speaking in generalities about my background in pediatric nutrition. They invited me to observe, or even volunteer, if I wished. I saw the gratitude in the eyes of new parents who had been struggling with colic, breastfeeding difficulties, or allergies. The staff was dedicated, gentle, and full of compassion. It warmed my heart to see such an environment flourish. But not everyone welcomed these clinics so enthusiastically. Whispers around the neighborhood hinted that Karen found them unnecessary and unattractive. She disliked the modest signage out front, the occasional line of strollers parked on the sidewalk, and the mothers who sometimes sat on benches while feeding their infants. According to local gossip, Karen believed such scenes ruined the upscale aesthetic she wanted for Magnolia Orchard Estates. Rumor claimed she considered them akin to a free clinic for outsiders. I dismissed the talk as typical HOA drama. After all, who could oppose a resource that literally helped babies thrive? Yet the uneasy look in neighbors' eyes, whenever they mentioned Karen's name in conjunction with the clinics, suggested trouble brewing. Still, I assumed reason would prevail, until I witnessed Karen's interference escalate from petty annoyance to direct sabotage. Within a month, I noticed subtle but worrisome developments around the infant nutrition clinics. Karen began distributing leaflets about parking violations, warning that non-residents using the clinic spots might face fines or towing. She posted stern notices on the community bulletin boards. Only Magnolia Orchard Estates residents or approved guests may use the parking spaces in front of the commercial plaza. That alone might seem innocuous, but many families from neighboring areas visited the clinics, especially after they heard about the high-quality services. By restricting parking so strictly, Karen was effectively discouraging outside parents from seeking help. Staff at the clinics told me some mothers called to cancel appointments, afraid of getting ticketed. Then, strange maintenance outages occurred at the small building. The water lines to the clinics were abruptly shut off twice during typical operating hours, supposedly due to routine repairs authorized by the HOA. On another day, the air conditioning units inexplicably failed, making the waiting area uncomfortably hot for pregnant women and newborns. Each time, a maintenance worker mumbled about HOA orders, though they had no official documentation. The clinic staff grew concerned. A lactation consultant, Jill, confided in me. "It's suspicious. These breakdowns happen only during the busiest hours. And Karen keeps showing up, clipboarding everything, scolding families for minor infractions like leaving strollers near the entrance. She's making it extremely uncomfortable for new parents." When I relayed these stories to neighbors, some shrugged that Karen always waged war on anything she saw as clutter or unpleasant. Others admitted they had overheard Karen rant about unwanted foot traffic from outside the development. Her single-minded desire to preserve a veneer of exclusivity was overshadowing the real mission, supporting infants in need of professional nutrition guidance. Instinct told me this was more than just petty HOA meddling. If Karen persisted, the clinics might be forced to shut down or relocate, depriving local and neighboring families of a vital resource. I considered using my expertise to speak directly to the HOA, explaining why infant nutrition clinics were so crucial. But I held back, uncertain whether revealing my professional clout would help or antagonize Karen further. Concerned, I attended the next HOA monthly meeting, held at the Magnolia Orchard Estates clubhouse, a large room with folding chairs and a long table for board members. The place was only half full, mostly older residents or folks invested in landscaping policies. Karen presided from the center seat, wearing her trademark scowl, flanked by the mild-mannered HOA president, Leonard, and two other board members who often deferred to Karen. They went through routine agenda items, approving funds for gate repairs, discussing lawn maintenance schedules. Then came a point labeled Commercial Plaza Concerns. Karen cleared her throat, scanning her notes. "I want to address the ongoing misuse of our commercial plaza by outside individuals who do not reside in Magnolia Orchard Estates," she said, voice dripping with disapproval. Specifically, the infant nutrition clinics attract a large number of non-residents who occupy our limited parking, leave strollers outside, and create traffic hazards. We need stricter rules. My heart sank at how she described families in need as non-residents, misusing the space. I stood, waiting to be recognized. The president, Leonard, gave me a nod. "Yes, you had a comment?" "I'm new here," I began carefully. "But I see how beneficial these clinics are for parents, especially those with newborns who need professional advice. They might not all live here, but they come seeking specialized help. The clinics also serve many residents of Magnolia Orchard Estates." Karen cut in. "They're taking advantage. If people want infant nutrition guidance, they can go to a hospital or a pediatrician's office. Our private development isn't obligated to serve as a free healthcare center for outsiders. This is not the image we want." I shot her a level stare. With respect, these clinics do a vital job. They handle everything from breastfeeding support to advising on formula usage, services not easily accessible in typical pediatric offices. Many families rely on these drop-in sessions. Let's find a compromise, rather than closing them out with parking restrictions or constant disruptions. Karen's lips thinned. She tapped her clipboard. "The HOA board is receiving numerous complaints about the added traffic and so-called chaos around the commercial plaza. It's also unsightly. Babies cry, strollers block sidewalks, so it's becoming a nuisance. No one else on the board contradicted her. Leonard shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The conversation ended with Karen motioning to tighten regulations, authorizing more maintenance checks to ensure the clinics complied with community standards. The meeting adjourned, leaving me with a sense of dread. Karen was clearly on a mission to sabotage those infant clinics, and the board lacked the backbone to stop her. Within days, Karen's meddling escalated from petty inconveniences to outright sabotage. The infant nutrition clinic staff arrived one morning to find the front door locked from the inside with a chain, a bizarre tactic no one could explain. Another day, sprinklers in the clinic's small front garden turned on at full blast whenever parents approached the building, soaking them. The sprinkler control box was apparently reprogrammed on Karen's orders. Some mothers slipped on the slick walkway, nearly dropping their infants. Worse, on a hot afternoon, the building's electricity mysteriously shut off mid-session. The interior lights, computers, and refrigeration units storing breast milk or specialized formula all powered down. By the time staff discovered the main fuse was flipped in a locked utility closet belonging to the HOA, nearly an hour had passed. Precious stock of specialized formula spoiled in the sweltering heat. Though the staff tried contacting HOA maintenance, they got evasive answers or found no one available to restore power promptly. A lactation consultant, Ms. Green, tearfully told me that the lost formula was critical for a few infants with allergies. Reordering it would cost time and money. Even the mildest storms of adversity could upend fragile newborn feeding plans. No direct proof linked Karen to these acts, but the pattern was unmistakable. She oversaw all maintenance crews and had a vendetta against the clinic. Furious parents began complaining to the board, threatening to mobilize. Some rumbled about a lawsuit, claiming the HOA was actively depriving them of essential medical support. At least one family with a medically fragile newborn was forced to drive an hour to an out-of-town specialist after losing access to formula at the clinic. That family's father seethed. Karen is risking my baby's life just to keep out outsiders. This is monstrous. Word spread, fueling anger among many parents. They started gathering informally, discussing how to protect the clinics. Meanwhile, staff grew anxious that the sabotage would intensify, forcing them to close for good. Their calls to local county authorities met with confusion, since the property was privately managed by the HOA. Everyone braced for a larger confrontation. Watching all of this, my sense of moral duty flared. I was a pediatric nutrition expert, after all. I'd spent my career advocating for children's health. Letting Karen destroy these essential services felt unthinkable. I decided it was time to step up, possibly revealing my professional standing if it might help rally legal or public support to save the clinics. At the next informal parents' meeting, held in a neighbor's garage because they feared Karen would disrupt any large gathering in a public space, I introduced myself fully. About 15 mothers and fathers listened, some holding babies, others trying to calm toddlers. The flicker of relief across their faces was evident as I spoke. My name is Dr. Amelia Reed, I said, using the title that I rarely flaunted. I'm a board-certified pediatric nutrition specialist who's worked with hospitals and public health agencies nationwide. I moved here for a quieter life, but I see we have a crisis. The infant nutrition clinics are a lifeline for many families. If Karen or the HOA shuts them down, newborns could be harmed. A hush fell. One mother cradling a fussing infant exclaimed softly, "You're a real expert in this? That's amazing. Can you help us fight her?" I nodded, feeling a mix of responsibility and determination. Yes, I plan to leverage my connections to highlight the importance of these clinics. We can also coordinate with local pediatricians, the county health department, and possibly the media if needed. If Karen thinks she can bully new parents into leaving, she hasn't seen what a unified group can accomplish, especially when children's well-being is at stake. Parents exchanged glances of renewed hope. A father volunteered legal expertise. I'm a paralegal. We might file an injunction if we gather enough evidence of sabotage. A mother who was a local journalist promised coverage to draw public attention. Another father, an IT specialist, offered to install cameras to document suspicious maintenance or forced shutdowns. We formed a small committee, vowing to defend the infant clinics. I promised to draft a formal letter to the HOA, referencing both federal guidelines, like the USDA's standards for infant nutrition, and the local county's contract with the clinic. If Karen was brazen enough to keep meddling, we would escalate to legal and media channels. Everyone left that meeting energized, determined to protect a resource that had become indispensable for so many families. As I walked home, I felt equal measures of resolve and worry. Karen was cunning, but the parents now had righteous fury on their side, backed by genuine expertise and the willingness to stand up for vulnerable newborns. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define the future of Magnolia Orchard Estates. The Parents' Committee wasted no time. We delivered a strongly worded letter to the HOA board, demanding they cease all harassment or sabotage of the infant nutrition clinics. Signed by over 50 neighborhood families, plus me with PhD, pediatric nutrition expert, next to my name. It outlined how these clinics provided essential health services recognized by county and state health agencies, operated legally under a commercial lease arrangement, served many residents of Magnolia Orchard Estates, as well as the broader community, faced repeated sabotage, lockouts, power outages, and vandalism that threatened infant health and violated property rights. We gave the board 1 week to respond or face possible legal action, with documentation of each sabotage incident. Meanwhile, my committee reached out to the local county health department. They were alarmed to learn about the disruptions. The department's director, Ms. Goldstein, promised an investigation. If these clinics are under contract with us, the HOA can't just force them out without cause. We'll confirm whether county law was violated. The response from Karen arrived days later in the form of a brief email to the entire neighborhood. Residents, please know the HOA board is reviewing concerns related to the infant nutrition clinics. However, we maintain that unauthorized use of our community's resources by non-residents is not allowed. Any suggestion of sabotage is baseless. We will continue to enforce our bylaws to preserve Magnolia Orchard Estates as an exclusive, orderly environment. Signed, Brenda Farnell, Karen, Treasurer. That same evening, an older neighbor confided to me that Karen had begun privately urging board members to vote to revoke the clinic's lease. She argued they had broken terms regarding parking, noise, and signage. If the board complied, the clinics would be evicted, forced to shut down, or relocate. The only bright spot was that some board members, spurred by residents' anger, hesitated to support her unconditionally. Leonard, the HOA president, seemed torn between appeasing Karen and avoiding lawsuits. Pressure built daily. The parents' group grew in size, families forging alliances. My phone buzzed with calls from anxious mothers, worried they might lose postpartum counseling or access to specialized formula. Meanwhile, the sabotage continued sporadically. A hidden chain locked around a clinic's rear entrance, or a sudden malfunction of the building's toilet facilities. Each event convinced us that Karen wouldn't stop unless forced. With each new disruption, my resolve hardened. Karen's arrogance endangered innocent babies. If the board caved to her, it would confirm the worst stereotypes about HOAs ignoring real human needs for the sake of superficial exclusivity. We prepared for a final push to either bring Karen to heel or drive her from power altogether. One afternoon, the county health department's enforcement unit arrived at the infant clinics, escorted by Ms. Goldstein, the department director. They intended to conduct a formal inspection of the premises, verify compliance with health regulations, and gather evidence about recent sabotage. The staff welcomed them, pointing out the flickering lights after repeated power tampering and the locked utility closets the HOA refused to let them access. Karen showed up, brandishing her ever-present clipboard. She insisted the inspection team had no jurisdiction over a private building. Ms. Goldstein calmly reminded her that the clinics operated under a county license, which permitted site inspections to ensure public health standards. Karen glared, muttering that they needed an appointment, but Ms. Goldstein produced official documentation. Defeated, Karen stepped aside, though her scowl betrayed how threatened she felt. As Ms. Goldstein's team toured the small exam rooms, they spotted telltale signs of harassment: missing extension cords, suspicious water damage near electrical panels, and oddly rerouted ventilation. The clinic staff recounted how, in the past month, water lines mysteriously shut off multiple times, formula shipments were tampered with, and mothers complained about random closure of accessible bathrooms. With each story, Ms. Goldstein's frown deepened. Karen hovered, occasionally interjecting that these were routine maintenance issues. But Ms. Goldstein took meticulous notes, conferring with her colleagues. By the end of the visit, the county officials compiled a damning preliminary report. They privately told me that if the sabotage was proven to be orchestrated by the HOA, it could constitute a public health violation. The county might even consider an injunction to protect the clinics from further interference. Karen realized her stalling tactics had backfired. The county's involvement meant potential legal consequences if she kept meddling. Nonetheless, I doubted she would relent. Her pattern was to double down in the face of opposition. For me, this confirmed that we needed a swift, decisive resolution. I whispered to Ms. Green, one of the senior lactation consultants, "Be ready. Karen will lash out again." Sure enough, the next week brought an even more blatant attack on the clinics. Staff arrived early Monday to find the glass front door shattered. Broken shards littered the waiting area. Inside, posters on infant nutrition had been torn from the walls, formula samples scattered and stomped on, and equipment toppled. It resembled a targeted act of vandalism rather than a random burglary, especially since no valuables were stolen, only items related to infant care destroyed or defaced. Local police arrived, dusting for fingerprints. Parents who came for morning appointments were horrified. The staff, near tears, scrambled to salvage what they could. The place reeked of sour formula. As I stepped inside to help, I felt a wave of anger. This was no longer petty sabotage. It was malicious destruction aimed at driving out the clinics entirely. Rumors spread that Karen had been overheard ranting about tearing down that infant fiasco. While there was no direct evidence tying her to the vandalism, the timing and pattern of sabotage strongly suggested her or her cronies behind it. The parents' group erupted in rage, calling for immediate legal action. Even moderate residents, those who previously shrugged at Karen's antics, condemned the attack on such a vital community resource. A police detective confided that if Karen or any HOA representatives were proven involved, criminal charges could follow. But without direct proof, an arrest was unlikely. Nonetheless, the tide of public opinion turned decisively against Karen. She was no longer a petty annoyance. She was seen as a threat to the well-being of newborns. The community's patience had snapped. The clinics, meanwhile, had to close for repairs, leaving countless families in the lurch. Some scrambled to find alternative care. The Parents' Committee demanded an emergency HOA meeting, determined to push for Karen's removal from the board. They wanted to finalize a lawsuit as well. My role expanded. I began drafting statements about the medical importance of uninterrupted infant nutrition support, distributing them to local media. If Karen insisted on turning this into a war, we were prepared to shine a national spotlight on her cruelty. Local news outlets caught wind of the vandalism. A popular regional TV station aired a segment titled "Infant Nutrition Clinics Under Attack. Who is to blame?" They interviewed tearful mothers holding babies, filming the shattered door and strewn formula packets. A reporter emphasized the clinic's crucial role in supporting at-risk infants, highlighting the sabotage's potential lethal consequences. People across the county watched in shock. On social media, outraged comments poured in, condemning Karen, even though many viewers had never met her. Hashtags like #ProtectOurBabies and #StopHABuse trended locally. This was exactly the type of negative publicity no homeowners association wanted. The HOA president, Leonard, was inundated with calls demanding immediate action. He appeared briefly on camera, stammering a half apology and promising a thorough investigation. But his meek approach did little to quell the public fury. Karen tried issuing a statement in the HOA newsletter, claiming ignorance of the vandalism and condemning unlawful acts. She still implied the clinics were a nuisance, complaining that they were exploiting media sympathy. This only fueled more backlash. Meanwhile, certain parents forwarded evidence to the TV station, including suspicious emails from Karen referencing her desire to remove that infant eyesore once and for all. The station teased that a major expose might be coming if more revelations surfaced. Amid the chaos, the parents' group formalized a multi-pronged plan. File a civil suit against the HOA and Karen personally, alleging negligence, harassment, and sabotage leading to property damage and interruption of critical infant care. Seek an immediate injunction to protect the clinics from any further interference, requiring the HOA to restore utilities, security, and safe access. Push for Karen's removal from the HOA board via a recall vote, which required a certain percentage of homeowners' signatures. The parents recognized me as a figurehead for the medical justification. My credentials lent credibility. "We need your testimony, Dr. Reed," they pleaded. "Explain how cutting off formula or lactation support can harm newborns." I agreed wholeheartedly, preparing a detailed affidavit. Karen could no longer hide behind spurious HOA rules. She was cornered, and if her track record was any sign, she would lash out even more viciously. But we had momentum, a righteous cause, and a united front of parents determined to protect their children. The stage was set for an explosive showdown. Responding to widespread pressure, the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting in the Magnolia Orchard Estates clubhouse. Flyers announcing it were posted with unusual urgency, along with disclaimers that all neighbors are invited. Word spread that local media might attend. The atmosphere crackled with tension as the hall filled that Wednesday evening, standing room only, with mothers cradling infants, fathers wearing outraged expressions, and older residents looking on warily. Up front, the board members sat behind a long table. President Leonard looking harried, Linda the secretary flipping through notes anxiously, and two other directors with grim faces. Karen, in her usual seat, wore a pastel blouse and a forced smile, arms folded protectively across her chest. She tried to appear calm, but the scowl lines on her face betrayed anxiety. Leonard cleared his throat, voice trembling through the microphone. "We're here tonight to address concerns regarding the infant nutrition clinics, recent vandalism, and allegations against the HOA. Let's keep it civil." Almost immediately, a father from our committee jumped up. "Civility? Babies are going hungry because of sabotage. My wife found the front door broken last week. Who's going to pay for that damage?" A chorus of agreement rose. Another mother shouted, tears in her eyes, "Karen, you cost me 2 hours in the ER with my newborn after your maintenance outage shut off the building's AC in 90-degree heat." Karen stiffened. "Those allegations are unfounded. Any maintenance or closures were standard. We do not condone vandalism." Linda the secretary interjected, "Karen, we have no record of any official work orders on those days. And you personally barred the county inspection at first. How do you explain that?" Karen glared. "I merely enforced the bylaws. The clinics were causing disruptions, and we needed to ensure they followed proper codes." The room erupted in jeers. I rose, waiting for quiet before speaking calmly. "For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Amelia Reed, a board-certified pediatric nutritionist. Infant nutrition is my field of expertise. These clinics provide critical services, particularly for at-risk newborns who may need specialized formulas or lactation consultations. By interfering with them, you risk harming the most vulnerable among us. This is not a trivial matter of aesthetics." Karen tried to retort, but I continued. "If the HOA forcibly evicts or sabotages these clinics, it's not only unethical, it could be legally actionable. We have documentation of repeated attempts to obstruct infant care, culminating in vandalism." Cries of support rang out. One father brandished a petition, stating, "We have well over half the community's signatures calling for Karen's removal from the board. We also have lawyers preparing a major lawsuit." He slapped the papers on the table near Leonard, who looked stunned. Karen's facade cracked. She spat. "You can't blame me for everything." The board agreed to reduce unwanted visitors. "Our property values matter." Leonard spoke softly. "Karen, enough. The board never approved sabotage or forced closures. We're in the crosshairs of lawsuits. We can't shield you from your personal actions anymore." Then, in front of the entire crowd, the father read from the HOA bylaws. "Any board member who commits acts endangering property or residents can be subject to immediate recall by a majority vote. We have more than enough signatures. I move for an immediate vote." Cheers erupted. Karen looked around desperately, as if searching for allies. But her influence had evaporated under public outrage. One by one, the board members raised their hands, endorsing her removal. The majority in the hall roared with approval. Leonard declared, "By unanimous vote, Ms. Farnell is removed from the HOA board." Karen trembled, tears forming. She tried to protest, but the crowd's anger drowned her out. The chaos ended only when she stormed out, face flaming with humiliation, pursued by a few hushed supporters. Even so, no one doubted the next step. The lawsuits would proceed, possibly ending in financial ruin or even criminal charges. The synergy of outraged parents and a recognized pediatric expert had proven unstoppable. Once Karen was ousted from the HOA board, the new leadership, led by Leonard under intense community scrutiny, took swift action. They passed emergency measures to secure the infant nutrition clinics. Full restoration. The board immediately greenlit repairs to the vandalized entrance, interior damage, and any compromised utilities at HOA expense. Security cameras. They installed cameras around the commercial plaza to deter further sabotage. Parking permits. The restrictive parking policy was rescinded, allowing outside families to freely visit. Official statement. They publicly apologized for the turmoil, emphasizing the HOA's support for the infant clinics moving forward. At the same time, the county health department assisted with a thorough cleanup, ensuring safe conditions for storing formula and operating equipment. Ms. Goldstein personally visited, praising the volunteers who helped rebuild. Once the glass doors were replaced and the interior sanitized, the clinics reopened with a joyous celebration. Parents hung balloons, staff offered free classes on infant feeding, and neighbors showed solidarity by donating extra supplies. Throughout it all, I provided medical guidance, verifying that spoiled formula was discarded and new shipments arrived on schedule. The staff expressed immense gratitude, crediting me and the parents' committee for saving them from forced closure. For me, it was gratifying to see the clinics bounce back stronger, with renewed community backing. Nonetheless, a sense of wariness lingered. People kept asking, "Where is Karen now? Will she retaliate?" The rumor was that she'd locked herself at home, or possibly left the neighborhood to stay with relatives. Meanwhile, lawyers prepared for the next legal steps. A wave of suits alleged that Karen had violated property laws and actively endangered child welfare. Another set of parents sought personal damages from her for costs incurred during the sabotage. The local police were also investigating the break-in at the clinic. If Karen or associates were found responsible, criminal charges could follow. Though the immediate crisis ended, the broader question remained. How severely would Karen be punished for her actions? The tide of evidence was formidable. The entire community braced for a legal showdown that could end with Karen's finances destroyed or, in the worst case for her, behind bars. With innocent infants at stake, no one felt sympathy for her plight. Over the next few weeks, multiple lawsuits converged on Karen. The infant nutrition clinics filed a civil suit alleging damages from harassment, vandalism, and forced closures. A group of parents joined, citing personal harm. For instance, medical bills for babies who missed critical formula or had to be rushed to urgent care. The newly reformed HOA board, now free from Karen's grip, officially distanced themselves from her. They published disclaimers stating she acted without board authorization and tampering with property or orchestrating maintenance outages. Karen's attempts at a defense seemed flimsy. She hired a lawyer who insisted she was a scapegoat, blaming the sabotage on unknown vandals. But the plaintiffs had documented suspicious text messages and emails from Karen's personal account to maintenance crews. In them, she demanded they lock the doors to discourage random outsiders or kill power to the building for a few hours. The most damning line: find ways to disrupt that infant fiasco until they quit. When this evidence became public during legal discovery, local media seized on it. Another wave of condemnation spread. HOA Karen exposed. Emails show plot to shut down infant clinics. The story overshadowed any sympathy she might have garnered. Even her loyal supporters in the neighborhood recanted, claiming they never imagined she'd go this far. Meanwhile, new details emerged about the break-in. Investigators found partial fingerprints near the shattered door, though they hadn't confirmed a match. They discovered Karen had borrowed a crowbar from an HOA supply closet the night prior, returning it with fresh scuff marks. While this was circumstantial, it added to a mounting suspicion that she either performed or orchestrated the vandalism. In depositions, I and several parents described the real-life harm done to families and newborns. I emphasized how precise feeding schedules and unbroken access to formula could be life-saving. I recounted the heartbreak of mothers in tears, their babies wailing from hunger, all because the clinic's power had been cut. The attorneys believed this human angle would sway a jury if the case went to trial. Karen, with no moral or legal justification, faced an avalanche of liability. As the lawsuits progressed, the infant nutrition clinics regained stability. Donations poured in from sympathetic viewers, local charities, and even large corporations wanting to show support. The staff expanded capacity, offering additional classes for postpartum care, infant feeding, and maternal health. Freed from constant sabotage, they flourished more than ever before. I found myself increasingly in the spotlight. Media outlets requested interviews, hoping to highlight the pediatric nutrition expert who stood up to HOA tyranny. I politely accepted a few invitations, focusing on the clinic's success story rather than demonizing Karen personally. On the local evening news, I explained, "Our goal is ensuring every infant has a healthy start." The community rallied to protect these clinics, proving the power of collective compassion. The segment ended on a hopeful note, contrasting sharply with Karen's predicament. Neighbors approached me with thanks, sometimes bringing gifts of homemade cookies or hand-drawn cards from older kids. I felt a bit overwhelmed by the adulation. I'd only done what any conscientious specialist would do. But the recognition underscored how dire the situation had been, how close the neighborhood came to losing an irreplaceable resource. Meanwhile, the question of Karen's fate loomed large. Some believed she'd flee or declare bankruptcy to avoid the crushing legal costs. Others relished the idea of seeing her in an orange jumpsuit for vandalism charges. A smaller group argued that banishing her from the community was enough punishment. But as more details emerged about the malicious extent of her sabotage, the consensus shifted. She needed to face real consequences. One day, rumors flared that Karen had come back to her house late at night to gather belongings. A neighbor glimpsed her car in the driveway, boxes stacked inside. By morning, the vehicle was gone, leading to speculation she might have left for good. But a week later, she reappeared during the day, stepping out to check her mail. Word spread swiftly, and soon a small crowd formed outside her property, some parents demanding an apology or explanation. Karen retreated indoors as the tension rose. The police, mindful of potential conflict, politely dispersed the crowd. Karen was rumored to have posted bail in one of the civil suits that sought to freeze her assets. The grapevine suggested she might attempt a last-ditch effort to mount a defense, or even countersue, claiming defamation. But such a countersuit seemed baseless given the overwhelming evidence. Days later, she emerged for a walk, only to be confronted by a mother, tears in her eyes, who said her baby ended up hospitalized for dehydration after formula supplies were lost. Karen tried to speak, but the mother couldn't bear to listen, calling her heartless and a monster. Karen fled back inside. It was a stark moment, revealing how profoundly she'd alienated the community. I learned from a friend at the county courthouse that a hearing was set for the next week to address the civil suits collectively. The judge would decide on immediate restitution for the clinics and possibly rule on personal liability. The same day, a separate hearing about potential criminal charges for vandalism was scheduled. It appeared everything was converging, and Karen would be forced to confront the consequences of her crusade. At last, the day arrived for the consolidated hearing on the civil suits. The courthouse was packed with families from Magnolia Orchard Estates, local media, and curious onlookers. Karen arrived in a wrinkled blazer, looking haggard, accompanied by her defense attorney. Opposite them sat a row of plaintiffs, the infant clinic's director, a group of parents, and their legal counsel. I was present, prepared to testify as an expert witness if called upon. The judge opened proceedings by summarizing the allegations: sabotage, harassment, property damage, interfering with essential healthcare services for infants, etc. The clinic's attorney presented damning evidence of locked doors, tampered utilities, suspicious text messages, and repeated incidents that hindered infant nutrition operations. Parents testified emotionally, describing the distress inflicted upon their babies, some with medical complications. The atmosphere was charged with moral outrage. Karen's attorney attempted to paint her as a concerned HOA official who sought to maintain order. She never intended to harm babies, he argued, and the vandalism remains unproven. Ms. Farnell tried to enforce parking rules and community standards, but the plaintiffs had unassailable proof: Photos of chain-locked entrances, the meltdown of specialized formula due to power cutoffs. Emails from Karen explicitly referencing ways to disrupt that infant fiasco. An expert IT witness explained how Karen's devices were used to send instructions to maintenance staff. Even the maintenance workers had given sworn statements that Karen told them to sabotage the clinics, threatening to fire them if they refused. When it was my turn, I calmly detailed how crucial consistent nutrition is for infants, especially those with medical issues or mothers who rely on expert guidance. I explained how forced closures can have immediate negative health impacts. The judge listened intently. My testimony provided a professional framework that underscored Karen's actions as more than mere inconvenience. They posed an actual threat to children's welfare. After hours of testimony, the judge recessed, deliberating overnight. The next morning, he delivered a scathing verdict. Karen was found liable for the damages inflicted on the clinic and families, in violation of multiple civil statutes. The judge denounced her callous disregard for infant health and ordered significant financial restitution, covering the clinic's repair costs, lost formula, staff overtime, plus compensatory damages for affected families. The sum soared into 6 figures. Furthermore, the judge referenced the pending criminal investigation into vandalism. While the civil verdict didn't itself impose jail time, it set a damning precedent. Karen left the courtroom ashen-faced, battered by the scale of the penalty. Another hearing for the criminal case awaited. Days later, Karen faced the criminal hearing for vandalism and potential child endangerment charges. The prosecution laid out evidence tying her to the break-in: her crowbar usage, her presence near the clinic that night, and text messages where she boasted to an acquaintance about finally scaring them off. Though some details were circumstantial, the overall tapestry was compelling. Her defense insisted the texts were jokes or taken out of context, that the crowbar was borrowed for home repairs, and that she was nowhere near the clinic on the night in question. But the weight of the evidence, combined with the civil verdict's findings, made the defense's story implausible. The court also heard emotional victim impact statements from mothers who faced direct harm. In the end, the judge found her guilty of felony vandalism and reckless endangerment, concluding that her sabotage extended beyond property destruction into potentially life-threatening territory for vulnerable infants. The judge's sentencing remarks cut to the core. Ms. Farnell, your acts of sabotage were not mere property disputes. They imperiled the health of newborns. Society cannot tolerate such reckless cruelty. You abused your HOA role, ignoring repeated pleas. This court deems incarceration appropriate, both to punish and deter. He handed down a prison sentence, 18 months, with eligibility for release after 1 year on good behavior, plus probation. Additionally, the court granted the prosecution's request to seize certain assets to fulfill restitution orders from the civil trial. Karen's home and personal savings were subject to forfeiture if she failed to pay the enormous sums owed. A stunned silence followed. The families who had suffered quietly expressed relief. I felt a wave of conflicting emotions: sadness that a neighbor's obsession with exclusivity had escalated to a prison sentence, but relief that justice had prevailed for the sake of the babies. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, Magnolia Orchard Estates experienced a collective exhale. The individual who had terrorized new parents and threatened infant health was gone. Freed from her tyranny, the HOA board reorganized, adopting policies to support, not hinder, the commercial plaza's essential services. Leonard stepped down as president, citing exhaustion and regret for not standing up to Karen sooner. Linda and others formed a new leadership group, vowing transparency and compassion. The infant clinics, now operating without fear, expanded their programming. They gained county funding to offer weekend workshops, lactation seminars, and nutritional counseling for older children. The staff reported an uptick in attendance. Families from around the region felt safer and more welcomed. Public goodwill soared, overshadowing the once negative image attached to the clinic controversy. I continued assisting the clinics in an advisory capacity, ensuring best practices in infant feeding. I also worked with local pediatricians to forge a network of support, so families with specialized needs had easy referrals. Our success story drew statewide attention: how a determined group of parents, supported by an expert, overcame a rogue HOA officer's sabotage to protect vital healthcare services. Occasionally, The subject of Karen arose. Some neighbors wondered if she felt remorse, or if she would return after her prison term ended. But the consensus was that her house would be sold to cover debts. The mere mention of her name triggered a mix of anger and pity. Anger for the harm she caused, pity for how self-delusion and arrogance had led to her downfall. Months passed. Karen's property officially entered foreclosure proceedings to satisfy the restitution judgments. A new family eventually bought the house, unaware of its scandalous past, but grateful for the community's welcoming spirit. The parents' committee that once formed to fight Karen's sabotage transformed into a neighborhood alliance supporting families in need. They organized charity drives, meal trains for new moms, and an annual baby health fair in the commercial plaza. Under the new HOA leadership, Magnolia Orchard Estates adopted progressive rules that balanced aesthetics with genuine care for residents' well-being. The association budget, once hijacked by Karen's personal vendettas, was realigned to maintain roads, sidewalks, and green spaces. The tension that once permeated the neighborhood lifted, replaced by a sense of unity born from shared triumph over adversity. The infant clinics thrived, serving more families than ever. I often dropped in to give guest talks, or to chat with staff about cutting-edge nutrition research. Seeing mothers nurse their infants peacefully in the bright waiting area, and fathers preparing formula without fear of sabotage, filled me with quiet satisfaction. We had safeguarded an institution vital to the health of newborns, a victory that felt deeply meaningful. Karen, meanwhile, languished in prison, her reputation in tatters. The tabloids occasionally picked up tidbits about her case, labeling her the HOA tyrant who endangered babies. If she read the news from behind bars, she might reflect on how short-sighted her quest for exclusivity had been. But for Magnolia Orchard Estates, the story was all but over. They had moved on, leaving her cruelty behind. One sunny autumn day, nearly a year after Karen's sentencing, the neighborhood gathered for a community festival. Under a canopy of vibrant leaves, families strolled the sidewalks, sampling homemade treats and browsing stalls set up by local artisans. A special booth showcased the infant nutrition clinics, offering free blood pressure checks, healthy baby snacks, and formula samples for new parents. Children toddled around, giggling, their futures made brighter by the very resources Karen once tried to destroy. I walked among them, inhaling the crisp air, reflecting on how adversity had drawn us closer. The fear that once gripped Magnolia Orchard Estates was gone. In its place stood an open-armed acceptance of visitors, parents, and children from all walks of life. The infant clinics had become a celebrated symbol of compassion rather than a target of sabotage. As the festival wound down, Ms. Green, the lactation consultant, caught my arm and smiled. We just broke a record for sign-ups today. Over 20 new mothers enrolled in the next session. Her eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you, Dr. Reed, for helping us stand up to oppression. We'd never have survived Karen's sabotage without your expertise. I shook my head humbly. It was a group effort. The real heroes are the parents who wouldn't let her push them around. I just added a bit of medical rationale. She nodded. Still, your presence reminded everyone that those clinics are vital, not optional. We parted ways, a sense of fulfillment warming my chest. Magnolia Orchard Estates had witnessed a dramatic saga. Karen's ruthless attempts to shutter infant nutrition clinics, the community's passionate revolt, and the ultimate triumph of compassion over petty cruelty. No doubt cautionary tales would linger. Neighbors would recount how Karen nearly robbed newborns of nourishment. But the final chapter showcased the resilience of parents, the power of expert advocacy, and the unstoppable resolve to protect the most vulnerable among us. In the end, Karen sat behind bars, her property confiscated to pay for the damage she caused. And in the quiet suburban streets she once terrorized, babies thrived in safety, coddled in the arms of grateful parents who could breathe a collective sigh of relief. Magnolia Orchard Estates continued blossoming, enriched by the knowledge that when an entire community unites in defense of its youngest, no sabotage could ever prevail.